The lilacs were in bloom, and the lawn looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. White tents, linen-covered tables, trays of shrimp and champagne weaving through a sea of polite laughter. I stood near the hydrangeas, in the same navy blue dress I'd worn to my last church fundraiser, trying to look like I belonged. Grant found me there. He looked taller than I remembered, his suit crisp, his smile bright, though it never quite reached his eyes. He leaned in to hug me, one arm around my shoulder, warm but hurried, mentioning the $8,000 a month. "Mom," he whispered, his breath smelling faintly of bourbon. I blinked. "What?" I asked, but it came out softer than I meant. He smiled, thinking I hadn't heard the transfers. "Hope it's making life easier." My heart clenched. "Grant," I said, steady but low, "I'm working 2 jobs." His smile faltered. "I clean the courthouse 3 mornings a week, and I shelve books at the library 6 nights out of 7. I haven't seen a dollar from you." From across the yard, Sabine's head turned, her wine glass, midair, tipped slightly in her hand. For a second, everything seemed to slow. The servers paused, the laughter dimmed, even the birds quieted. Her gaze met mine. I watched something flicker behind her eyes, not surprise, not concerned calculation. Grant's arm dropped from my shoulder. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His brow furrowed as he looked toward his wife, confusion settling in like fog. Sabine slowly turned her back to us and disappeared into the house. I stood alone again among the lilacs, heart racing, unsure whether I'd just imagined it all, until Grant took a sharp breath beside me and said, "That doesn't make any sense." I stood on their back patio, surrounded by people whose names I couldn't remember and whose smiles didn't reach me. Everything smelled faintly of garden roses, expensive perfume, and a wine I couldn't pronounce. Sabine floated from guest to guest like a hostess in a dream, laughing softly, touching arms lightly, her sundress crisp and white like fresh linen. You'd think the world belonged to her. Maybe it did. I watched her refill glasses and pose for photos beside Grant as if nothing had just happened. Not a flicker of unease crossed her face. She was practiced, polished, impenetrable. The invitation to this party had arrived just 2 days ago, a forwarded message from Grant. No call, no personal note. Before that, I hadn't heard from him in over 6 weeks. His last birthday message to me was a text with a gift card to a store I couldn't afford to step into. The year before, a necklace arrived with the receipt still in the box, but no voice, no visit, no question of whether I needed anything or anyone. I once spent 3 days sewing a Halloween costume for him by hand. I remember tracing his shoulders while he stood fidgeting on a chair. His 7-year-old eyes lit up with the thought of being a superhero. Now he wore tailored suits and spoke to me like a polite stranger. Sabine had that effect. Even when she first met me, she shook my hand like we were in a business meeting. "It's so lovely to finally meet you," she'd said, glancing at my coat with the missing button. Grant had changed after marrying her. It wasn't obvious all at once. Just small things, less frequent calls, fewer questions, a careful, growing distance that felt deliberate. I looked down at my shoes-faded black flats that had once been comfortable, and were now simply familiar. I didn't belong here, not among the champagne toasts and curated smiles. I stepped toward the house, not looking back as I passed a group of women complimenting Sabine's taste in linens. Inside, the lights were softer, and so was the voice I heard from behind me. Grant followed me inside, his brow still furrowed, eyes darting around like he was replaying a scene he didn't understand. We found a quiet corner near the kitchen, where the laughter from outside was muffled by glass and polished wood. "Mom," he said, voice low, "are you saying you haven't gotten any of it? I've been transferring $8,000 a month for 3 years. I kept my hands folded tightly in front of me. "I don't know where it's been going, Grant, but not to me. I've never seen it, not once." He shook his head. "That doesn't make sense. I set it up myself. Sabine helped with the account, said it would be easier for you that way, less for you to manage." "Did you ever check the account details?" I asked. He blinked. "No, she said she handled it all." We stood there in silence. Then, as if drawn by the tension in the room, Sabine appeared near the archway, holding a small porcelain plate with shrimp skewers. She smiled when she saw us. "Everything all right?" she asked, tone bright and smooth. Grant turned to her slowly. "Sabine, can you come here a moment?" She walked over, still smiling, but her eyes darted between us. Grant didn't speak right away. He just looked at her. Then he said, "Mom hasn't been getting the money, the 8,000. She's been working 2 jobs. Did you set up the right account?" The smile twitched at the edges. She opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came out. Her hand trembled, and the shrimp on the skewer slipped slightly. Her face turned pale. She dropped the plate. The skewers hit the floor. Her hands went to her throat, not in a gesture of choking from food, but something else entirely. She gasped, staggered slightly, eyes wide, as they locked with mine. This wasn't shrimp. This was panic. She backed away slowly, breath shallow, and eyes swimming with something far too close to guilt. Grant called after her, but she was already gone. And I stood there, still, with the same quiet question looping in my mind. Where had it all gone? I walked home after the party ended, refusing Grant's offer to drive me. I needed the silence, the cold air, the time to put my thoughts into rose-like books on a shelf. 3 years. 3 years. He thought he was helping me. 3 years I worked through the cracks of my own body, my hands growing stiffer with every mop, every cart of books, my feet aching before the sun rose, my spine curling under the weight of invisible things, dust, shame, and silence. The pharmacy had called twice about the arthritis medication, but I hadn't picked it up. It was a choice between that or groceries. Some months, the groceries lost. I remembered one winter night, my breath fogging up the inside of the bus window. The driver had turned up the radio, and the song playing was one Grant used to love. I'd gotten off 2 stops early just to cry without anyone watching. The library job helped keep me steady. Quiet aisles, predictable patrons, and I could pretend for a few hours that I was just another woman with a quiet life, not someone checking her bank account before buying toothpaste. I'd gotten good at disguising hunger. A handful of crackers at noon, hot water with lemon at night, pretending it was tea. June, my neighbor, once brought over leftover soup, saying she'd made too much. I never asked how she knew. And through it all, Sabine smiled. She posted vacation photos. She sent a thank you note once when I mailed them a birthday card for their dog. She looked me in the eye every Christmas and said, "We're so glad you're doing well." I had believed maybe that Grant didn't know, that he'd simply forgotten how to care properly. But now I saw what had really happened. He hadn't just forgotten. He'd been kept from knowing. I stood in my kitchen, flicking on the one dim light above the stove. The fridge hummed, the silence thickened, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel tired. I felt awake. I pulled out my old notebook from the drawer and wrote down a single sentence. Find out where the money went. Grant showed up 2 days later, unannounced. He was holding a thick folder, his face pale and drawn. I let him in without a word and set the kettle on, more out of habit than hospitality. He sat at my kitchen table and spread out the papers like he was opening a wound. "I've been up all night," he said quietly. I sat across from him, hands folded, my tea steeping beside me, untouched. He pointed to the top of the first page. "This is the account the money went to. Every month, 8,000, for 3 years. He slid it across the table. It had my name on it, Mariel T. Alden, but the address wasn't mine. I read it twice, blinking. "That's not where I live," I said. He nodded. "It's a rented mailbox on Claymore Street downtown. I called the place this morning. They confirmed the box was registered by Sabine 3 years ago." I didn't say anything. Grant's hand moved across the pages, pointing now to transactions. "This is what the money was used for. Spa treatments, designer boutiques, wine country getaways, a high-end fitness club with monthly fees higher than my rent, personal training, beauty products from stores I'd only seen in magazines, a reservation at a resort in Aspen, not a single grocery bill, not one utility payment." My tea had gone cold. "She told me you were getting the money," he said, staring at the spreadsheet like it might change. "She told me you didn't want to talk about it, that you were proud, that it embarrassed you to accept help." I watched the receipts pile up between us. Sabine had built a perfect little life out of smoke and mirrors and my silence. I didn't cry. I counted the deposits. I counted the months. I counted the meals I skipped. I thought about the winter I slept in socks and gloves because I couldn't afford to turn the heat up past 58. "I trusted her," he whispered. I looked up at him and nodded slowly. "So did I." He sat back in the chair, his mouth pressed into a hard line. "I want to make this right," he said. I stared at the name on the fake address again. "I want to know what else she's hiding," I replied. It was June who reminded me about the land. We were sitting on her porch when she mentioned how the state was buying up parcels for a highway project west of town. "Didn't your Robert inherit something out that way?" she asked. My heart paused. Yes, he had an overgrown patch of forest his grandfather left him. There'd been talk of building a cabin once, but after Robert died, I could barely keep the lights on. let alone manage taxes on vacant land. I'd assumed it had been auctioned off years ago. I called Lucinda the next morning. Lucinda Mott had been a friend of Robert's since their college days and practiced law in our county for nearly 4 decades. She still remembered our wedding date and the middle name of our son. When I told her what was happening, she didn't flinch. She asked for paperwork and a day to dig. She called back the next evening. "You still own it," she said. I sat down. "Technically, it's still in Robert's name, but as his widow, the legal transfer is simple. The taxes were never delinquent." "How's that possible?" "Because someone's been paying them," she replied quietly, consistently, "for the past 3 years. Sabine." Lucinda confirmed it. The county records listed the payer as S. Alden, with a contact address matching the Claymore Street mailbox. There was more. Lucinda had run a check against the state's infrastructure plans. The land, just under 12 acres, fell directly within the corridor for the proposed highway expansion. The compensation range, she explained, was estimated between $1 million and $2 million, depending on environmental impact. She paused, letting the number settle. "Marielle," she said gently, "Sabine's not just stealing from your son. She's setting herself up to claim the biggest thing Robert ever left you." I didn't respond right away. I was too busy recalling how Sabine had once offhandedly asked whether Robert's family had anything left in terms of assets. I dismissed it then. I hadn't known. Lucinda's voice cut through my thoughts. "We can secure your claim, but you'll need to act fast before she builds a stronger case." "She's been planning this," I said, "not just taking money, building a paper trail." "Exactly." I looked out the window at the small patch of lawn I'd struggled to mow last summer. And then I thought of 12 wooded acres my husband once hoped to pass down. I'd let it fade from memory. She hadn't. I pressed the phone to my ear and said, "Let's get started." Lucinda's voice sharpened. "Then we do it now." The conference room was quiet, but thick with tension. Grant sat beside me, jaw tight, hands clasped on the table. On his other side, Lucinda's presence was steady, her pen poised but still. Across from us sat Sabine. She looked tired but not humbled. Her usual glow was dimmed, her hair pulled back too tight, lips bare of color. But the performance was still there in the way she held her chin, in the silk scarf looped perfectly around her neck. Her attorney, some man I didn't bother remembering, opened with pleasantries. Lucinda ignored them. She slid a folder across the table and said, "We're not here to debate feelings. We're here to clarify facts." Sabine's lawyer opened the folder, and his face changed. Bank records, tax payments, email correspondence, paper trail of precision and premeditation. Sabine spoke before he could. "I never meant to hurt anyone," she said, voice soft. "I just thought Marielle didn't want charity. She always seemed so proud." "So you stole," I said evenly. Sabine blinked. Her lawyer placed a hand on her forearm, but she pulled away. "I kept things running," she continued. "The property taxes, the account. I didn't take anything that wasn't helping the family." I leaned forward. Helping the family would have been letting my son know I was cleaning offices at 5 o'clock in the morning while he thought I was safe and supported. Helping the family would have been honesty. She looked down, silent. "I'm not pressing charges," I said. "I won't take this to court." Her eyes flicked up, and for a second I saw the faint spark of relief. She thought she'd won something. "But I will speak," I continued. "To your friends, to your family, to every person who ever looked at me like I was lucky to have you in my life. I will tell the truth calmly and completely. No drama, just facts." Sabine swallowed. "You didn't just take money," I said. "You took my relationship with my son. You took 3 years of birthdays and calls and worry and silence. You made me invisible." The room held its breath. I turned to Lucinda. "Let's finalize the land transfer. I'm ready to move forward." Grant reached for my hand, but I didn't need the support. I'd already stood up. I'd already spoken. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one shrinking in a room like this. I signed the final papers on a Tuesday morning. Lucinda slid the documents across her polished desk, and I wrote my name with a steady hand. The state had offered $1.6 million for the land. After taxes and fees, it was more than I'd made in 4 decades of work. I didn't cry. I felt something better. Quiet, grounded relief. I bought a small house in the Blue Ridge foothills. Nothing grand. Just a white cottage with creaky floors and morning light that spilled across the kitchen table. The neighbors waved. The air smelled like pine and damp soil. No one here knew me as someone's mother. No one expected me to show up, polished and invisible. I retired from both jobs without ceremony. I left my library key on the circulation desk. And I never looked back at the janitor's closet at the courthouse. My hands, once cracked from bleach and dust, found their way to a paintbrush. I wasn't good. That wasn't the point. I planted lavender and tomatoes, and sometimes sat for hours watching the bees work harder than I ever wanted to again. The silence felt earned, the slowness sacred. Grant called more often. Sometimes he visited. He asked about the paintings, the flowers, my tea. Sabine never reached out, not once. I assumed she moved on to another version of control somewhere else. It didn't matter. She no longer lived in my mind. One morning I stood barefoot in the dew-soaked grass, coffee warm in my hands, and thought, I have stopped surviving. I am simply here. A car pulled into the driveway, slow and familiar. Grant stepped out alone, holding something behind his back. He brought lemon tea and 2 shortbread cookies. He held them up like peace offerings, and I smiled as I took them. We sat on the porch, the wood warm beneath our feet, the mountains quiet in the distance. I finalized the divorce, he said after a while. His voice didn't crack. It didn't need to. There was a peace in the way he said it, like something had finally settled. I know, I said. Lucinda told me. We sipped our tea in silence for a few minutes. No apology, no guilt-tripped promises, just presence. He didn't ask if I needed money. He didn't bring up the past unless I did. Sometimes he simply asked what I was painting, or if the lavender had bloomed yet. Other times we sat and said nothing at all. I learned things about him I hadn't known in years. That he hated networking events. That he wished he'd become a teacher instead. That he'd started writing again essays, mostly about clarity and second chances. He asked about my arthritis without pity. I told him the truth without flinching. This was new between us. Easier, honest. One afternoon, he looked out at the trees and said, I don't want to send you money anymore. I turned to him. I just want to spend time, not fix, just be around. I nodded. Then stay a while, he did. And when he left that day, I didn't feel the familiar pull of loss. I just rinsed the teacups and returned to my canvas. The letter came in a plain envelope. I almost tossed it, thinking it was another circular. Inside was a notice of settlement. $12,000. Awarded from a class action lawsuit against the financial firm Sabine had used to funnel the stolen money. I set the check aside without much thought. It wasn't the number that mattered anymore. What mattered was the second letter tucked beneath it. A request from a nonprofit organization working with older adults, women like me, who'd been quietly cut off, financially manipulated, erased. They wanted me to speak not as a victim, but as someone who took her voice back. I said yes. I spent the evening at my kitchen table, outlining what I'd share. Not just the betrayal, but the subtle ways it grows, through silence, through small omissions, through trust placed in the wrong hands. I didn't plan to sound angry. I planned to sound certain. The next morning, I stepped onto the porch with my coffee. Birds darted through the sky above the pines. A light breeze lifted the edge of my robe. I closed my eyes and let the moment land. They stole years, I whispered, but not my future. Behind me, my phone buzzed. A message from Grant.